Welcome to CyberSessions by CIISec. This episode is about mental wellbeing and burnout. Enjoy the episode.
Hi, I'm Ashley Sweetman and I'm a Senior Manager in Cyber Partnerships for Standard Chartered Bank.
Hi, I'm Annabel. I'm founder of The Lamplight and also I head up the mental health and wellbeing stream for CIISec.
Today we're going to be talking about mental health and wellbeing, and we're going to have a conversation between the two of us. So I guess the first place to start is probably to talk about what we mean by mental health and wellbeing. What is the issue?
I think it's something that is much more prevalent, much more in the press, more now than ever. I think that's partly due to the pandemic. I think that's brought a lot of things to the forefront that people are talking about. I guess really the term burnout is thrown around a lot, I think, but really ultimately what we're talking about, I think, is chronic stress, where there's a physiological impact on your body from sustained stressors, and that's something that we can't get away from in cybersecurity. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think the key point there is this sustained point, right? There's almost a sort of fact of life in a way, which is there will be stressful periods or times where requirements at work and other personal requirements and commitments will mean you're in a stressful situation, but it's this sustained kind of, relentless periods of stress, which I think there seems to be some more examples of that, and those seem to be the really worrying situations where there's no solution, or people often feel like there's no kind of quick fix, or they aren't aware of what tools there are to try and manage that stress, and it's really relentless and it takes a toll, and that can be sort of physical or mental health and those kind of issues. So I think that sustaining point is what I'd really highlight.
No, you're right, I think, because I think people always talk about stress in a really negative way, but stress is meant to protect us. Ultimately, that's what it was there for originally. How it originated was to give our bodies the ability to be able to run away from lions that arrived, or to be able to fight when we needed to. So that's what it's there for originally. But obviously our bodies are still responding in the same way as we always have to those types of things, but actually now it's on a sustained longer term basis, and I think that's obviously what's causing a lot of the problems that we see today.
And the pandemic, as you said, is an example of that, right? Because there was this kind of completely different scenario. People were out of their normal patterns and probably felt, social norms were stopped, and people were really restricted physically and in other ways from interacting with other people and doing those kind of things. That is really, I think, and with other kind of societal changes, meant that people are having this conversation more. But I think it feels like people are still slightly lost sometimes. It can be hard in that situation, I imagine, to really step back and try and find the tools to help. But and I should say, neither of us are medical professionals, but
absolutely not. Yes,
but have experience of maybe working in my case in a large global organization where we've had to try and find solutions for a lot of people, and there's obviously not one solution that fits for everybody, but you also have experience in this area. That's right.
Yes, absolutely. It was in 2020 when I started to look into this, actually, initially, as I was running a cybersecurity company at the time, and was really aware that a lot of people were struggling, not only within the organization, but a lot of leaders in my network were talking more and more about burnout, more so than I'd ever really heard them before. And I think that really prolonged period of stress where people were isolated really had an impact on people. So I started to do some research really to try and see how we could best help within the organization. And some of the research was really fascinating, actually, in terms of what you can do individually, but also obviously what you can do on an organizational level. Because I see a lot of people talking about this now on LinkedIn. It's quite often burnout articles, but people are talking about the macro, really, and people are talking about it, that it is an issue, and of course it is, and it's great that we're talking about it. But I think we could really benefit with more what to do advice, I think, really, and that's what I've tried to find out for myself, really, and find a way of sharing it with other people if possible, if that helps.
Exactly. I mean, even one small example, just in preparation for this, I was reading something on the Harvard Business Review about burnout, and the point that really stuck with me was that burnout can sort of manifest itself in a number of ways. It can, you can be physically exhausted and really kind of visibly burnt out, or you can be, research shows you can be, be cranky, for want of a better word, and you can be sort of disengaged, and you can have sort of low self-esteem and not think you're really progressing at work and achieving. So it's not just a kind of physical manifestation that somebody's exhausted, but there are all these there's a sort of plethora of ways that it can manifest itself. And I guess one of the things that we can do as individuals is be more aware of some of those cues, to notice that amongst colleagues and people we manage, for example, or anyone we interact with, really.
Definitely, and understanding that there are different levels of burnout as well, and having a better understanding of what it means to be at what level, actually, what physiologically is going on in your body is actually really helpful. It was really helpful for me to understand it, to kind of know this is what's happening at this stage, this is what happens at this stage, to understand actually where you are, so that you're much more aware and in tune of how you're feeling. Because I agree with you, I think the classic things that people always assign with it are well documented, but some of the things, for example, like, just not having clarity of thought, not being able to make decisions, not being able to sort of think your way clearly through what feels like a very simple activity or something, a situation that you would usually be able to deal with quite quickly, and just not having the ability to deal with that. And so these are the things I think that it's much better to kind of bring to the forefront and talk about, so that people are much more aware of it, like you say. So
I think one of the things that underpins that, and certainly in my workplace, and I know from friends, is that having really open and honest, transparent conversations with colleagues or line managers, or even doing sessions similar to this but internally, can help. And we can talk a little bit about what you can do as a colleague or individually, or even what you can do for your team. But at a kind of organizational level, what are the sort of things that you've seen or you think are really good, or even best practices that can help individuals manage burnout and workload and well-being, and the kind of interlinked issues?
sure. I mean, first and foremost, I think this really is an urgent business issue, and it's not something that should just be palmed off to the HR department or people teams or other people within your organization. Ultimately, this is impacting the people within the business, and that therefore is a big an issue on the business, because the impact of long-term stress isn't just people being stressed, it's actual real impact on people's health. What physically happens in your body when you're stressed means that you shut down certain other parts of your body, stop working, like your digestive system, your cardiovascular system. It means you can't repair tissue very well. It impacts reproduction and things like that. So these are things that have much longer term issues and are much more likely to lead to longer term absence or illness. So really, for me, business leaders need to take this seriously, because actually, one, it's good for people, and that's always something I'm interested in, and two, actually, it's good for business if you look at this. And it comes down to culture. It comes down to culture and the culture of an organization, and whether there is a culture of, I think first and foremost, there has to be a culture of trust to be able to talk about these things and raise them, and for people to feel like an organization really means it, rather than we feel like we have to be talking about this because it's expected to, and to be able to look at, particularly we're talking around the cybersecurity teams. It's a hard job being in cybersecurity, particularly if you're in the defensive teams. The job is never done. It's never over. We never go home at the end of the day and think, wow, great, we've managed to conquer this and we're completely safe now. I mean, we never get to that position. So I think understanding that, and understanding that you've got to really look at how the teams that are involved in those types of jobs in your company are being looked after, how they're looking after themselves. You and I both know about the statistic about people working much longer hours than they probably should, and that's down to leadership. that's down to leadership to model. It's down to leadership to make sure that people are going home when they should, and not taking advantage of that, really, I think, in some respect. And it's got to be modeled. Sometimes I think not taking holiday and not taking leave and working long hours is sort of worn as a bit of a badge of honor. And those days have got to be over, I think. So, I mean, how about you? I know you've looked at this, a lot, obviously, and it's a very large organization. How have you tackled it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really good example I heard of actually where an organization was suffering an incident, and in the case you say, the cyber criminals don't log off for the evening, or because of the, geographical spread of them, there's no time zone. And the first thing that individual did in that incident was send half of the team home and set the other half of the team to work on it, knowing instantly that you'd have to rotate people. And a huge part of that instant response would be also managing people's well-being, because if you're going to have people responding all the way around the clock, there can't just be some people who burn themselves out and then you just get a whole lot of new people in. And I thought that was quite a nice example of actually, in a really sensitive, time pressured situation, that individual had the kind of thought to look after people's well-being.
Yes.
In a really high stress scenario. I mean, so I definitely recognize what you say about having open, honest, transparent conversations. In our organization, for example, there's definitely some role modeling of that behavior, and not working outside of hours, trying to avoid sending emails out of hours. There's a little bit of that because we're global and actually stuff does happen overnight naturally, but I think we're kind of told, like, if you're taking time off, take time off, because that is another kind of badge of honor, is somebody having leave they really need to recuperate, but sort of sat by the side of the pool or something with a phone next to them, kind of answering emails. And even that small amount of interaction is enough, I think, for you not to switch off. And
absolutely.
Kind of
I mean, I think the modeling is really key, and that has to come from leadership. And when I say leadership, any kind of leadership within an organization, you don't need to be at different management levels to be a leader in the company. Even team leads. I mean, I'm guilty of it myself. I've always made sure, spoken to my teams about taking leave, making sure they use it, and then have been the world's worst person about doing it myself. And the penny didn't click until a couple of years ago, when I sort of realized, well, actually, people are really, there's a permission thing there, really, or I'm setting an example. So I could say one thing and do something else. But for me, real leadership is about talking the talk and walking the walk, not just talking the talk. So I think it's got to be, I think, that understanding, I think, and it goes back, I think, to leadership development really as well. I think in terms of understanding the impact of actually what you might be communicating and what you might other people might be hearing might be two different things. You used the example just now of obviously a very forward-thinking person in the team to go, well, actually, these people are going to be very burnt out and very tired very quickly. So actually, I'm going to protect some of the people in the team, and we're going to rotate. But that person will be naturally probably people-orientated. And obviously, you get lots of different people in lots of different roles who might not automatically think like that. Not that they're doing it intentionally. So I think some of this needs to be captured in the culture, but also, what does that mean? I'm not a big fan of culture in the term of let's write some slogans on a wall and, nobody actually really knows what it means. Actually, what does that mean for people within an organization, and what can they expect? And I think that really makes a difference then, whether people feel that they can come and talk and be open and say, because I know a lot of people still are afraid to say that they're struggling with their mental health. It's still something that people feel ashamed about, and people feel they have to hide. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's the chief exec, and she was feeling, it was a very long-term stress, and she was kind of suffering a little bit from burnout, and somebody suggested that she take some time off, and she said it's not possible to do that. And it would be almost easier to be physically ill in a different way than to be at that stage, because actually she felt like it would be more understood, and it's more evident and more obvious actually if she'd broken her leg or something else. But actually it's the same thing. But, so I think these things are still, they're still out there and they're still impacting how people feel about it. And we've got to debunk those myths and try and change the narrative, I think. So
Definitely. And I think it's also around, you don't just have to use some of those tools to help you when you're already feeling burnt out, right? There's also a preventative side to this as opposed to being reactive. And as an example, so the leader of the function I work in, our CISRO, is a very good example of really being quite strict with his time and, understanding what he needs to do personally, exercise wise, and all this stuff to be able to sustain that level of, leadership and responsibility. My line manager also does the same, and will block out time for exercise. And then, in my case, I play football on a Friday morning, and that is kind of like in work time, but it's what I do for my mental well-being and physical well-being. And it's just kind of understood that at a different time my manager goes to play tennis or whatever exercise she does, and it's because somebody from the top is exemplifying that behavior that we feel comfortable to do it, and nobody's going to question it. And that is quite empowering. And we kind of talk about that as a thing that helps us, even though we're not necessarily feeling burnt out in particular times. It just helps to sustain that, helps with sustaining that level of responsibility and pressure, I think, which is really invaluable for me. And to be frank, means I would choose that employer or have loyalty to that employer over others where you don't necessarily hear or see that culture is there.
Absolutely. I mean, going back to the business issues, and it's well documented in cybersecurity that, there's a shortage of talent, not enough people coming through, more jobs than there are people to fill them, high attrition rates in some organizations. These are all things that can make a difference. So even if whatever your intention is behind this, actually, I don't see that there are bad business outcomes to be had from it.
Mm-hmm.
There are positive outcomes, I think, in terms of the well-being and, and there are much bigger business issues, I think, to think about. The UK has the lowest productivity of all the G7 countries at the moment. So even just from a productivity, people not, not being ill or not long-term illness and things like that, and loss of productivity within an organization, even if you don't subscribe to this because you feel that it's something that businesses shouldn't have to look at, and you're just focused on profit making, well, this is going to impact profit. So for me, it doesn't matter which way you look at it. Actually, it's a business issue, and so organizations, I think, should be looking at this in terms of tackling how they, particularly, I think, across the organization, but particularly in cybersecurity, I think, is having more understanding of actually what it's like to be in those teams, what the issues they're facing, and that chronic stress that they're faced with. So, but I think what you were saying, I think in terms of the exercising, things like that, and preventative stuff. I mean that's absolutely some of the stuff that I've that's really helped me in terms of my understanding. Really, is what happens in your body when you encounter a stressor, whatever that is, and that our body has to. It's a physiological thing. It has to basically close the stress response cycle, and exercise is one of a great way of doing that, because your body at that point is totally primed to run. Basically, your muscles are basically, everything is diverted from everywhere else in your body with the whole sole purpose of you being able to run as fast as you can or to fight. So like you're saying, exercising, ideally they say between 20 minutes and 60 minutes a day, is the best way to try and deal with ongoing stressors that aren't going to go away, because you can't come into work the following day and probably those things are still going to be there. So being able to just understand that there's a system that your body, if you can do that, and there are other things which are great, because I think some people roll their eyes a bit and say, well, people say just exercise, or and it's not for everyone. But there are other things that people can do that has the same impact on your body. And I think just understanding that is quite a powerful thing. I think that you can close that cycle yourself and actually make your body more relaxed. But, exercise is the primary way. It's the kind of the best way for that to happen. So, yeah.
I find it gives me also like a bit of perspective on my job as well. I try and do calls walking around the block with my AirPods in, If I go off and play some sport and then come back to work, you do feel refreshed and you've got this kind of energy out, but you also, there's this kind of idea that you sit in front of a screen and the kind of walls close in, and every email you get, it gets kind of stressful, and it's means everything to you. But actually, you go out and walk in the outside world and go get coffee or whatever you do, go to the park. It just gives you a sort of sense of actually it's not everything, and it's important, and you value it in different ways, and it gives you things, but it's not everything. Whereas I think one way that you can really be drawn into really potentially damaging kind of situations for your mental well-being, or just kind of not becoming obsessed with work, but just not having the work as a healthy amount of your life compared to everything else that you do in that situation. So that stuff, I think, as well, just getting a different perspective, whatever it is you do, even if it's not exercise or anything, I find it so helpful for just maintaining a good energy and outlook on my work.
Definitely. I call it walking therapy. I mean, I think that is one of the things that the pandemic gave some people, is that actually was the only thing we could do at one point in time was to go out and get exercise for the allotted, what was it, 10 minutes or something? I can't remember. But I think a lot of people started walking actually during that time, and a lot of people found it really useful. And it's something that I know a lot of people have kept up actually, and because I think better when I'm out walking, actually, particularly if I'm mulling through something. So, but for people who don't like exercise, there are definitely things that you can do that has the same impact. So, for example, like dancing around your kitchen to I don't know, Beyonce or something when you get home, that has exactly the same impact on your body, responds to it in the same way. Or if you really don't like dancing or running or exercising, one of the other things I learned was about tensing your body. So if you tense your body and then hold it and then release it, that kind of has the same, it just signals to your body that the stress or whatever it is. The thing I found that was fascinating is actually when just the remover of the stressor doesn't close the cycle. So that stressful situation you might have had a P1 in the sock or something like that, and you've been dealing with it, and it might have passed, and the case is closed. Just because it's closed doesn't mean your body has stopped being stressed about it. And I thought that was the thing that really the penny dropped for me. So we have to do something that signals that actually we are safe. And the best way of doing it is kind of just some sort of physiological response in your body. Other things are laughing, belly laughing, apparently, creative outlets, music, arts, going to the theatre, cinema, and also affection. So it could be pets, it could be apparently a 20-second hug has exactly the same impact on your body. So if you think about it, actually, a lot of these things we were deprived of a couple of years ago because we were in lockdowns. And so actually, it's no wonder that a lot of people suffered their mental health on the back of that, because actually a lot of things that we naturally do that is able to help our body, basically, we weren't able to do. So I think it's not underestimating that social contact, for example. So how important is it to meet together in teams in your company? I don't know if that's something that you promote internally around that. Is that kind of social interaction?
Definitely. I was going to say, actually, I think we're at a really interesting time for this, where you see in some organizations who want people back in the office for more days, for example, in the civil service is kind of saying 60% time in the office. And it's really interesting because the pandemic came and I loved the working from home setup. And I thought, a day a week in the office is probably enough for me on average. And that's my formal sort of setup. But having in the last, sort of month or so, just been a bit ill with like COVID, chest stuff, and not gone into the office for like 3 or 4 weeks, really have realized how much I miss that interaction. Not necessarily even on work stuff. There's often colleagues there who I just know from work, but I don't actually work directly with. But having multiple social interactions in a day and in a week as opposed to working from home every day in a week, really, I think gave me a lot more energy. And, yeah, it was just, I really realized I missed it. And I think it's quite easy to fall into the trap of just thinking, oh, you know what, it's really much easier to work from home. I don't have to get up and cycle in, and I can just get straight online. But there are actually some really, bad practices that I've probably slipped into there, like just waking up and logging onto my laptop at the last minute for the call I've got to get on. Whereas actually, really try to get up and get some fresh air and get outside, or even just stand outside before getting to my laptop. Because before
Yeah.
you know it, it's lunchtime. You haven't moved. You've kind of interacted with a lot of people on a screen, but not had any kind of real life stimulation.
Yeah.
And so I think we're at a really interesting time as to what companies do on this and how much you're meant to be in and how well people coordinate it. Because we do try and, go in on the same day as colleagues based in the same country, and we're much better at trying to do regular social things, even if that's with colleagues across the globe. We'll do some kind of virtual um, social thing, and that has definitely focused also on getting to know each other more as people, because that has also helped facilitate more open conversations about workload and burnout and stress and all that kind of stuff. So actually just knowing each other a bit more, even if we've not met in person, because we're spread out really globally. That has all really helped, I think, and it's this stuff which is actually developing a culture as opposed to just saying we're like that.
Yes.
And it's really contributed. But I think it'll be really interesting to see where we kind of end up. What the real long-term impact of the changes of working from the pandemic will be, because of the potential impact on well-being and mental health.
Definitely, I think it's something organisations are absolutely still struggling with, that kind of balance between people at home, people in the office, people liking elements of it. I think one of the things I was surprised about, there's a report that came out of MIT by a Dr. Donald Sull and Charlie Sull a couple of years ago now, and they did a report on the Great Resignation, obviously, that came after the pandemic, and they've done a lot of research with organizations about what are the things that make people leave organizations and what are the things that make people stay or more likely to join. And actually, social interaction is in the top 5, which I was really surprised about, because I wouldn't have rated it up there. I would have put it up there somewhere, but I wouldn't have put it in the top 5. And I think it, because ultimately we're wired, that old adage, we're wired for connection. We're social beings. We like to be part of a team, or we like to feel connected in whatever way we want to be connected. And lots of people obviously feel differently and have different needs on that. But so I think finding ways that people can socialize or connect in a different way that might be different to maybe 10 years ago, when, it was usually just everyone went for a beer or something after work, or so I think it's actually carving out, making that time specifically, or giving people, encouraging people to do that for themselves, I think is really important. I didn't realize how important that is, so I was really surprised it is ranked up. Money is 16th on the list, interestingly. So everyone talks about money, but actually there are other things that people hold much more of value than just financial recompense. So
yeah, that's really, really interesting. I think the point you said there about empowering people as well, essentially, to make their own choices, is particularly important in cyber, where there's sometimes a misconception that everyone who works in cyber is really technical and is a coder, or is maybe even a former hacker who's sat there in a hoodie sort of coding at a computer. But there's also, and I'd include myself in this, somebody who's non-technical. You're sort of risk practitioners, more used to interacting with people. There's got a wide spectrum of people there and skill sets, and therefore needs, like any organization. But I guess a cybersecurity function, in this context, is what we're thinking about. So it's really allowing people to have that freedom and feeling that you can make those choices. I think there's a lot of companies now will give people unlimited annual leave as part of their terms and conditions. But I think the research says that people who have that employment opportunity actually take less leave, because you feel less able to. And there's, it's a kind of false, well, for some people it's kind of false promise, because the workload is so significant. But just creating an environment where people feel able to make those choices for themselves, I think is probably the, if you can get to that point, you're probably doing quite a good job, I would say, right?
Definitely, I think, but it goes back to creating this. I mean, the reason about the holiday stuff is it's because I was talking to somebody about this actually the other day, and they were saying, "Oh, I wouldn't like that because I feel like I'm sort of being tested." And I said, "Well, there you go. There's a real example there of lack of organizational trust and safety, effectively, because that's what the assumption is, rather than this has come from a really good place and a really good intention, which is quite often what it is. People don't trust that. So actually, you can't do these things in isolation. You can come up with really good initiatives within the organization that come from a really good, genuine place. But if you haven't taken the time to build that culture and make sure that that's embedded in at all levels of the organization as well, not just that the board thinks that something exists, and quite often it doesn't flow down and cascade down through an organization. So it's taking that time. So if you really want these things to be live within your business, you've got to work at it. You've got to get that to, you've got to build the foundations first before you can expect people to embrace certain things. And that's really obviously really difficult to achieve. But I think that's what I see obviously with what I'm doing now, is that people are coming up with good things and good initiatives, but actually they're not having the results that they wanted, because actually there's a bit of groundwork that needs doing before, and that obviously has to start with leadership and culture. So
a great experience I had on this sort of thing actually at work, when I was a couple of grades more junior, was we did something called reverse mentoring, where I mentored somebody who was like a managing director, and it was really fascinating. Like, we did it over, I think it was sort of 12, 16 weeks, where I kind of mentored him about what it was like on the ground and how these things, as you say, actually filtered through to sort of working level. And it was a real eye-opener for him, I think, and a sort of great experience, an eye-opener for me. And I think that was a really, really valuable example of what you can do to get those people engaged in what it's like, what the culture is like on the ground.
Absolutely. I think those things are brilliant. I think it's great that you've had experience of that. I think those things are really good, I think, to really find out what's happening, because I think the statistics on actually what people will really tell you, even when you feel that there is that culture there, is actually, they're quite shocking when you start to look into them. But so going back to obviously the burnout and how people can help themselves, I guess, I think initially, obviously, it's this short-term thing, which is how do you develop these interventions that you can kind of help. I mean, what's worked for you? Is there anything that you can kind of recommend, things you've read or places you've gone and researched?
So I think somewhere like SC Magazine, where you see people like yourself publish articles and thought pieces on this, are really, really helpful, and can give some really specific recommendations on what different organizations are doing on this. I think another good place I always go to is the World Economic Forum's agenda blog, and the cybersecurity stuff on there again is often from member companies talking about stuff like skills or well-being and different best practices. And those would be two places I'd highlight as just being able to get a really well-informed view on what a load of other organizations of various sizes and geographies and spreads will actually doing on this topic. Cool, thanks. I've been Ashley Sweetman.
And I've been Annabel Berry. And just as a recap, just to say that if you have any issues that have been prompted from this podcast, to go and get medical advice, and there are really great resources out there. So thanks very much.